All right, so let's see. So right now, my name's Kim Ernstrom. It's nice to meet you all. And I currently work for the National Park Service and live in Boise, Idaho. And I actually work with an interagency group of people that's mostly Forest Service. There's only 2 of us that are Park Service. There's 18 of us in this group. And it's called the Wildland Fire Management Research Development and Application Group. My official title is Fire Management Specialist, but I do a lot of technology transfer and working with some planning software right now, the Interagency Fuels Treatment Decision Support System. So I'm the project lead for that. So it's an interesting group of people. The group that I am working with started about 12 years ago, and that's when I moved to Boise. And I've been with that group since. We do a whole bunch of different things with fire management, everything from teaching just S classes to going out on fires in the summer, mostly doing fire behavior for the most part, supporting line officers when they are making decisions and going through their decision support sort of steps, if you will, on big wildland fires. So that's kind of the summer piece. And then we do a bunch with the Rocky Mountain Research Station, working with some of the scientists up there as they develop new tools and things. We're sort of the middle person in order to talk to the field, see what kind of things the field could use, what could help them in their job, and then try to build some of the training and tech transfer materials and classes and things like that to help the scientists get their information to the field. So anyway, it sort of runs the gamut. And I currently am spending most of my time on the fuels stuff. I did do a detail with the NWCG, the National Wildland Fire Coordinating Group, and got quite involved in working on a big project coming up that's going to overhaul almost all of the training that they do to support the positions that are in in fire across all of our partners. So a lot of neat things going on right now, but those are kind of my titles. I am number 4 on here. I say I'm a wildland fire cynic, optimist, and a realist, because I think over the course of my career, I started in, pretty much in 1993, I guess. And so about 30, oh gosh, going on 30 years. That's hard to say. But it's funny because fire for me started off and it was just this really interesting, puzzling kind of thing. Like, wow, people do this. And over time, we got really involved with fire use back in the 90s, in early 2000s, when we got real excited about managing fires in the wilderness and stuff like that. Letting fires play their natural role. Well, and then we've come full circle now to where sometimes that's not a great idea anymore, due to climate change and things. So for me, it's been this sort of, pathway, I guess, from being a very kind of rah advocate, let's go, we need more fire, to I'm not sure we need more fire all the time everywhere. So anyway, I'll tell you a little bit more about that, but that's what that's all about. When I say I'm sort of a cynic, but I'm still an optimist, and I have hopes for the future. So I got my bachelor's degree at Mary Washington College in Virginia. And I mostly was in geology and geography at the time. And I actually knew nothing about fire back then. I grew up in Ohio, and I was sort of a Midwest girl, spent some time in New England. And the only thing I knew about fire was in 1988 when Yellowstone had the big fires. And I remember that being on the news. Tom Brokaw told us about that, on the nightly news. And then it was like, oh, wow, that's cool. There's fire, who knew? So, but I went into my geology and geography degrees, and I was mostly interested in geomorphology and streams and water and things like that. So I left that job and wandered over to the Forest Service, and I'll take you on that little path here in just a second. So I didn't start off really knowing much about fire, really having a thing that I'd be interested in it. So that's evolved as well. And then I went to Montana State and got my master's degree in 99. And I was lucky enough to do a project in Yellowstone, actually on the effects of those 88 fires that I had watched on the evening news, and their effects on stream morphology in the backcountry. So that turned out to be a really cool project to bring sort of all these things together. And yeah, anyway, so that was just sort of my background there. And you can see a lot of my interests are outdoors. I like to be outside and enjoy Idaho and things, and fire's on that list somewhere. But I think as I get further in my career, it's lower on the list. It's still fascinating to me, but it's one of those things that is, I think it's, now I know there was a time in my life that I thought I was like worried, I'd get out of fire, and I really liked it. And now I know it's always going to be there. It's a guarantee. So that is one thing about climate change, is job security. Whether that's a good or bad thing, I'm not sure, but that is a fact of life. So anyway, that is sort of where, like I said, my journey sort of started in Pinedale, Wyoming. And I took that job with the Forest Service when I left Mary Washington. And it was on a whim, I didn't know much about the West. I'd never really been out West. And we had to fill out these really long paper applications back then. And somehow we figured out how to do that. And this gal hired me, but it was as a hydrologic technician, and it was doing backcountry stream and lake monitoring. So it really didn't have anything to do with fire, but all their seasonal employees, they sent to fire school. So I got that first introduction just from, being there doing this other job. And again, it was kind of like, oh, wow, like I said, people do this. That's cool. And then at the end of that season, I ended up helping with several prescribed fires. And then I was kind of hooked after that. Like, ooh, people that get jobs in this, maybe I'll try that. So I ended up going and working on a couple different heliTAC crews, mostly. And that in 1996, I was actually on my way to Bozeman to go to graduate school. And I worked that summer on the Indianola helicopter, which is in North Idaho there, on the other side over towards Montana. And that was sort of the beginning, I guess, of it all. And I think my mom, even to this day, she thinks I'm still like, she keeps asking me like, are you ever going to get a real job? Like it started back then. And on that helicopter crew, and I didn't tell her I was on the rappel crew because I didn't want her to be worried. And I think even now she still wonders like what I really do when I leave in the summer and go on fire. So anyway, but that was a cool way to get into it. And we got to travel around a lot and got to see a lot of different things. So, and then I did that work in Yellowstone. And then when I was writing my thesis, I got a job in Yosemite to work on their helicopter. So that turned out to be a pretty cool pathway, I guess, from being an undergraduate to putting sort of this science stuff together, which is what the pictures are in the middle. That was doing our measurements and everything in the backcountry, looking at these streams and how fire, we did like a paired watershed study, looking at an unburned and a burned watershed and looking how the fires impacted them 10 years after those 1988 fires. So that kind of pulled it all together for me, really. And I was kind of hooked on the idea of wildfire and science, and kind of kept going from that. And this one picture where it's just sort of this, if this is actually in Nevada, this landscape, I have these pictures. I was going through my pictures the other day. I have a couple of them. They're labeled quote, stupid fire. And it's because we would go on these fires in the middle of nowhere. And I didn't know much, I was still kind of learning, and I was scratching my head like, why are we putting these fires out? This seems silly. And then we'd had these single tree juniper fires, and it was just like, okay, well, I guess that's what they're paying me to do, but this doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. So I kept doing that. And then again, back to the prescribed fire stuff. And I realized that maybe that is really the place to hang your hat, is in this prescribed fire world, because that seems a lot more, meaningful, and a lot more, I don't know, just the management of it seemed like a better way to do fire, I guess. So I kind of veered over towards the fuels world because of that, for the most part. So you can see some of the little pathway here that I've already mentioned, but so I ended up here at the Prescribed Fire Training Center. I'm in the middle column here. made my way from, my first job in Pinedale all the way down this list and then over. And I worked for the Nature Conservancy. I finished graduate school and then took a job doing GIS. That was one of the big things I had learned while in graduate school. And it turned out to be a really important part of my education, because GIS is one of those things that you can sell to anybody. Everybody wants somebody that knows GIS. And that was back then, and that is true now. So that was a skill I had learned in graduate school that actually got me my first job with the Nature Conservancy. And I am still super grateful that that professor took me under his wing and said, here's a GIS project, now go figure out how to do it. And I didn't know anything about GIS. And it was really kind of cool to like just learn it on my own, working with him. And it, like I said, it got me my first real job. So I moved to North Carolina. Well, I didn't last in that job very long. I was there, for maybe a little, maybe a year, because I really wanted to go back to fire, because I kept like that was the thing that was really kind of, the thing that really I felt passionate about. So I actually left that position and went to work in Texas, again, for the Nature Conservancy, but this time doing fire effects and a lot more prescribed fire. So that's where that shift over to the prescribed fire world kind of began. I got my first government job in Utah on the Fish Lake, again, back to the helicopter stuff, since I'd had that experience. And that was the first time I got a permanent position. And back then it was really hard to get permanent positions. There just wasn't a lot around. And that's when the National Fire Plan came into being after the big fire season in Montana in 2000. So they were actually started to throw out a whole bunch of jobs, just like they're doing now. Actually, it's really interesting to watch this go in 20-year cycles, because right now we just got this infrastructure money, right? And we got billions of dollars being thrown at the wildland fire management problem. Same thing happened back in 2000, and they did a big hiring, slurry of people. I was one of those people, and obviously stuck with it. But I don't know if we're going to have as much success with this next round of hiring, because things, in my opinion, have changed as far as folks getting into this business. So I'm excited that you all are tracking that way, because we desperately need people like yourselves to take the reins as we go on here. So I went to the Prescribed Fire Training Center as the coordinator, and that was in Florida. It's out of Tallahassee. So I ended up back east, and not really where I wanted to live, but it was where prescribed fire is, where people do prescribed fire. The most prescribed fire in the country is done in the Southeast. So I figured if I wanted to be a good lawyer, I'd have to go find a place, a city, probably, to practice law and learn law. But in this case, it was prescribed fire. So I said, well, I got this job opportunity. I don't really want to live in Florida, but I'm going to take it because I'm going to learn a lot. And that's what I did. So I moved to Florida and lived there for a few years running the training center program, which was great. I mean, the traveling around, that was probably a key in my career, as far as taking that chance to a place I was only kind of lukewarm about, but really I met more people and learned more in that job than I ever could anywhere else. So I wouldn't be in this job I am today had I not taken that job back in 2001. So felt very fortunate. I look back on it now, how fortunate I was. So sometimes you just don't know where you're going to end up, take those chances. I think that's a huge take home message for me. I worked on the shot crew for a few years in Asheville, stayed in the East, and then I got a job for the Park Service down in South Florida. Again, a place I don't really want to live in South Florida, but it was a great job. And I was the prescribed fire specialist, and we got to burn, 40,000 acres a year down there, which no one does that anywhere else, really. So that was a great program to be part of. And I learned a lot, worked with great people there. And then I moved over to the Fish and Wildlife Service over in Florida Panther, which is the National Wildlife Refuge across from Big Cypress down in South Florida. And then from there, I came to Boise back in 2010. So I moved around a lot. I think at one point I lived in 11 different states in 10 years. And these are, this was sort of the path and the jobs I took on the way. And a lot of people say, don't people frown on that? It looks like sometimes you move around too much or you leave jobs too often. And I don't think so. I mean, in this case, a lot, my jobs were seasonal until I took this job on the Fish Lake. And then that was a permanent position. But I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do, what I wanted, I knew I wanted to be in fire, but I hadn't quite nailed it down yet. So it was important to me to get all that experience. But I ended up back in Boise. I wasn't, and I love the West. I wanted to live out West. And when I turned 40, I got to move back to Boise. So it took a while, but I'm here, and I've been here 12 years, and I love what I do. So yeah, it's been a great journey, to say the least. I actually am eligible to retire next year. So I don't know if I will, but I could keep working for a bit. But we'll see. It's definitely a puzzle, just like the slide. And this is truly what I love about fire and fuels management in particular is, it's really all about the people. The people I see every summer. Running into Heather this summer on a fire up in Cascade was so cool. Like, Heather walks in the door. Oh my God, Heather's here. Wow. Hi, Heather. It's like, this is great. And a bunch of people that I, come and go. You just never know who you're going to run into. But it's certainly a community of like-minded people. And we might not always agree on how to handle different management things, but for the most part, we're all pointed generally in the same direction. And that's a really cool thing to be part of. So, that's my crew down in South Florida there at the Florida Panther Refuge. And they're a great group of guys. We burned acres after acres. We dropped balls from helicopters and got to see lots of really amazing fire and sorting out the puzzle, in my mind, that prescribed fire is, especially planning really hard prescribed burns like this one over here on the right in these neighborhoods. That's how it works down in the Southeast. People are used to this sort of thing, but it takes a lot of planning and and sort of problem solving to figure out how to pull it off. And that's probably the thing I like the most about it. I've translated a lot of that to some of this work I'm doing. The picture in the middle is doing a lot of work with fire modeling these days, and looking at how to use some of these spatial tools and GIS and modeling to help people make better decisions in fire management and in planning. And that's where we're headed right now with the escape prescribed fire with the Forest Service. This spring has really brought a lot of attention to the IFTDIS, the fuels treatment stuff that we've been doing, because we really want people to start using these spatial tools and thinking a little more 21st century about how we do our planning. So anyway, those are the things I think for me that have really caused me to stick with it, I guess, over all these years. And I wish sometimes I was back doing this, this is in the Everglades, the bottom left here. Who knew that ping pong balls could make little hearts on the ground, but they can. And I wish I was doing that again sometimes. And maybe when I retire, I'll go back and take some job at it. Maybe I'll come work for one of you guys, actually, on one of your crews, and just go play, drag your dip torch around. I don't know. That sounds like a lot of fun to me. So yeah, so that's kind of why I love what I'm doing. I think I brought this up at the beginning. To me, the challenges are, not enough fire versus too much fire. Like we don't have any gray area anymore. I feel like it's one or the other. We're either trying to do our damnedest to do mechanical treatment so we can pull off some prescribed burning of some kind or protect a community. You got these thickets of forests out there on one end, or we get a wildfire and we just nuke everything and we burn down the McDonald's, which, holy cow, how are we doing that? This is from California, and I never in my wildest dreams would have thought we would have wildfires that were burning down the McDonald's or the Walmart, but we are. And so we go from this, these forests that are horribly mismanaged, in my opinion, as far as why we are where we are today, and climate change. And then we end up with this, and figuring out this middle piece and getting back to something in the middle is really what the challenge is. And I don't have the answer for it. And I would argue that some of our leadership does not have the answer for it either. It's going to take a lot of smart people in your generation to figure it out, because we have not been able to. So that's, to me, the challenge. For success, I think I probably touched on a lot of these already, but you know, to me, science of any kind, doesn't matter what kind of science you're in, as long as you have some sort of science training, background, education, it all fits. You know, it's all critical thinking, learning a lot about weather and climate. I remember having a book, USA Today, actually, they had a book. It was like an 8.5 by 11 book, and it was like Weather and Climate for Dummies. And it was the coolest book because it had the best pictures and stuff in it. And I remember I would just flip through that book, and that became, I'm not a meteorologist or have any sort of skill in that department at all. But with all the fire behavior work I'm doing, I've come to know quite a few with the National Weather Service, and understanding that stuff and being a student of that in fire, to me, those go hand in hand. And if you're going to do anything in this job, knowing and being sort of have some sort of knowledge and interest in that is really important. And policy, you know, whether we like it or not, policy is part of this. And hopefully, as you guys, if you stick with it and go through your careers this way, you're the ones that will be making the policy. So to me, understanding what's worked and what hasn't worked and what's made sense and what has not made sense is a key to doing things differently in the future. So I really feel like that knowledge is really important. I think the stuff in the middle kind of speaks for itself. Be a good communicator. That if I had to actually pick one thing on this slide, it would be that learning how to be an excellent communicator and an excellent listener, I think, is really, if you can do that, you will go far. And I think that's the thing I find one of the things when I meet people for the first time, I notice if they're listening. You know, it's like, did they listen to anything I just said, or are they just waiting to talk? And that's really, you know, to me, what is important. So, yeah, it's interesting to meet people and think about that. But yeah, I think communication and written communication too, being a good writer, I think is quite important. Technology is great. I think sometimes we should go back to crayons and flip charts. And I often wonder when I teach, I want to do that because it's overload sometimes. And I think we need to sometimes step back and think about the fundamentals. And then having any sort of training in project management is what I've learned along the way. And that could be anything from managing a fuels project and designing a fuels treatment to like we're doing the software development, and that's gigantic project management. And having some of that knowledge about how project management works has been really helpful. I'm no expert in it at all, but I've at least learned a few things along the way to become better at it. Yeah, and then I think attitudes, like I said, I think those sort of speak for themselves. But that phrase "student of fire" to me is a key in it all. You know, just being curious and always wanting to learn and try to tie these things together is crucial in doing well. Being humble is also, to me, fire is a very humbling thing, no matter what. And you will be humbled sometime in your career, I promise you. And love triangles, because we love triangles in our job. It's all about the fundamentals. So yeah, just the things that serve me in life. Moving around, all those jobs I took and moved around. I learned a lot about fire behavior in the South, and it doesn't run uphill down there. You know, it's pretty flat. So you learn a lot about the nuance of things. You know, the joke down in Florida is if you're on a hill, if your feet are dry. And which, you know, and that's subtle, but that really is important to the way fire works in those environments. So who knew I would use a leaf blower as a fire suppression tool in, you know, Kentucky or those leafy forests back east. So that was key to moving around and seeing all of those different things. Plants, I'm not a plant person, but I sure wish I knew more about them. If anything, I wish I could gain some more information on plants and plant physiology, because especially now with the climate stuff, it's quite important in the why fire is behaving the way it is. I already mentioned the weather, and like I said, that GIS skill that I learned back in graduate school has served me well through my career. So don't be afraid to grab onto some of those things. I think another one that in the middle, the become a good teacher, because I think you learn the most about something when you have to teach it. And that's why I think I got into training, and I love training and I love doing classes and stuff. So, and I've learned probably most from having to teach something, because you become the expert in it. And it's fun. I think it's fun, especially if you can do it in a dynamic way. And I know Heather's really good at that. So, yeah, and I think I already mentioned some of the stuff in the attitudes box. So, yeah, but definitely curiosity. It might kill the cat here and there, but it's still probably pretty important, and it'll serve well in the end. So I think, yeah, again, these came up in my discussion, but being willing to move around, just getting your foot in the door. And like I said, if it's a job, you're not going to stick with forever, but it's sometimes those are the jobs you learn the most from, really. Same thing with having good and bad supervisors. I've probably learned more from my bad supervisors than my good ones. So even though you might be in that situation, it's okay, hang in there, learn what you can and move on. But it's definitely a thing that you will come across. Yeah, try everything out. It's definitely okay not to know. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I even do in my job now that I'm asked to do, and I'm like, God, I really don't know how to do that. But I'll figure it out. And so I auger in, I think, learning on our own sometimes, and being given a project and just having to fumble through it is probably the best, rather than having, things handed to you and say, do it this way. Sometimes that's helpful, but a lot of the times I think learning is really best achieved when you don't know from the beginning and you got to just figure it out. And then we go to school. I know, Heather is teaching some great classes and stuff, but in the end, there really isn't a school for this. It's about putting all these pieces together and picking and choosing the pieces that fit for the situation you're in at the moment. So it's hard to identify that sometimes, but I think that's what I found over the course of almost 30 years now. And then, yeah, have fun, be the employee you would like to supervise. And we started off by saying fire is a very small world, and it's tinier and tinier all the time. And I've definitely worked for some people who I ticked off along the way, and I went, oh no, okay, now I got a little humble pie there. But that happens, and I think it's good to know that going in. So I think those are the keys for me, at least over this chunk of time in my fire world. Is that all of them? I think that's, I have one more. Yeah. Good old Smokey. We'll burn the other planets later. Hopefully we get back to where we can do that, actually, and we'll get that gray area back from our ends of the spectrum right now. So I'm counting on you guys to do that. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Kim.